Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for attending this webinar. Welcome to EDFA's TBT S webinar, Adapting TBT S to the Australian Setting, with Dr. Laura Hill, Carmel Fleming, Michelle Roberton, Jasmin Watson, and Tamara Worotniuk. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, Tamara.
Not too bad, John, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My apologies for keeping the introductions of speakers brief so we can hear from them rather than me. I have great pleasure in introducing my colleague, mentor and friend, Dr. Laura Hill. As detailed in the flyer for this webinar, Laura has a distinguished career and record in the eating disorder sector over many years. I'm sure you would all agree that through her contribution to the design and development of the temperament-based treatment with supports, Laura demonstrates her significant credentials in co-design, co-production of genuine therapeutic collaborative alliances between her patients, their supports, and the whole TBT S team at UCSD. Carmel Fleming, as lead at QEDS, has a distinguished record in bringing inclusive and collaborative treatment options to the clients attending services offered at QEDS. Carmel's belief and support in TBT S is a clear demonstration of that record. Michelle Roberton, as a lead at SEED, has had a significant influence in the advancement and introduction of treatment options for Victorians that are contemporary best practice of co-designed, co-produced therapeutic alliances between supports, clinicians, patients, and research. Tamara Worotniuk is a clinical psychologist at Epworth Hospital, where her primary focus is patients with borderline personality disorder. Through this work, Tamara has developed an interest in supporting patients and with eating disorders and is currently exploring how TBT S can be applied across inpatient and outpatient settings. Tamara's willingness to introduce TBT S into Epworth's general mental health setting, where eating disorders are typically addressed as a secondary issue, demonstrates her commitment to finding solutions for her clients. Jasmin Watson, an occupational therapist at Barwon's Eating Disorder Service and coordinator of Geelong Clinic's Eating Disorder Day program. Jasmin is an experienced eating disorder therapist working with adolescents and adults with eating disorders. She has a particular interest in embodiment practices and uses yoga in treatment of eating disorders. Jasmin's efforts to champion the introduction of TBT S into Geelong Clinic's Day program demonstrates a significant interest and commitment providing co-designed, co-produced arrangements. Before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians from the land on which I am hosting this virtual workshop, the people of the Noongar Whadjuk Nation. I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging elders, and the same with all other Indigenous populations around Australia and around the world. Oh, done too fast. Okay, for chat and questions ready for the Q&A session, please use the chat session and put them in there, and when we get to the chat, we'll address them. Please have your video off. Please mute your audio unless you are speaking. Here's where Laura is located and heading into autumn and at 8 o'clock in the evening. Thank you, Laura, for coming. And now over to the participants and Laura as discussant.
Thank you very much.
Let me stop my share. Yep.
Okay. And I will start and with mine and begin to share. Okay, and thank you to the Eating Disorder Families of Australia, EDFA, for hosting this panel tonight. It is a pleasure and a real privilege to be able to work with my colleagues there in Australia and to have had the opportunity to have the many interactions with those on this panel tonight. So we hope that, and our goal is to help introduce this new novel treatment to you, as well as to help you begin to realize this novel treatment that is about 180 degrees from a different perspective than ongoing eating disorder treatments. And so how to adapt it, how to explore it as a clinician that's just looking at it anew is our way to introduce you to it tonight. So wherever you are in Australia, it is my pleasure to be interacting with you tonight. So let's look first at where we look at with eating disorder symptoms currently. And currently, all ongoing treatments look at the symptoms, whether it's around binging, purging, restricting. The concept is, if we're looking at the illness as it is, we're looking at the outward signs of the illness, the symptoms that are expressed behaviorally. And so in order to address those, as you well know, cognitive behavioral therapy has been looked at since the late 80s, early 90s, and moved forward in its trials. And it has been proven to be effective for bulimia, binge eating disorder, but nothing has yet been proven to be fully effective for anorexia nervosa. But other forms of therapy have come along to help with the restrictions, such as acceptance commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapies, looking especially at the binge and purge side, and the current treatments focus on these symptoms. So what is missing? And this is what has been our operandi for over 30, 40 years. And what we have seen and what we now know has been missing in treatment are the roots, the attention to the root causes that trigger and influence the illness. And that begins with the genetic foundation that set up the tendencies that may move a person to be more vulnerable to eating disorders, and the neurobiological networks that form in the brain from those many hundreds of genes that tend to set those traits into perspectives. And then the traits that we all have, whether it's biological traits such as your height, your feet size, your eye color. We're also looking at temperament traits. And we're looking at temperament traits because it is those traits that very much come from our personality and influence the vulnerability. And those traits have been genetically founded and are genetically set in place and neurobiologically structured even before, just as the fetus is developing and moving into full birth. We know that the brain has begun already a way to start expressing those traits. And then the environment gets to have a way to shape the traits that have been inherited. So let's look at Cloninger's model, which is so simple to show you where we are, and looking at this treatment and how it impacts other ongoing treatments. You've all studied personality, and when you look at personality, let's break it down most simply to character being the social nurturing side, the nurture to personality, as temperament is to nature. Nature being the genetic and biological side. And that has been the very agent, the very huge gaping hole that has been missing in treatment. RODBT has touched upon it, but hasn't, it's kind of like pointed its way into the temperament chasm, but has not in any way addressed the temperament as a full aspect of the treatment. So what is temperament? It's the biological foundation to our personality, our innate features, whether it's biological or personality. And it's the genetic and neurobiological underpinnings that influence, that literally set into a default our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So it is the root trigger. It is the underlying trigger to those symptoms. It is the default trigger to those symptoms. So what we're looking at is ongoing treatments have focused on this aspect, and a temperament-focused treatment is now being developed and is far along in its development after about 12 years, and looking at temperament so that we can say, let's fill the gap and not have one or the other, but look how temperament can augment and be integrated into a symptom-focused treatment so that clinicians can start speaking to the why and helping clients understand the why, helping support people, the family members understand the why and the how, because the more we understand what is going on in the brain and what those genes do to influence our traits, the more we can look at change over time and how we can use our own traits to actually be a part of the solution and not assume that our traits are all pathological. Every trait can be expressed both productively and destructively and involve hundreds of genes to form that trait. So temperament-based therapy with support is an emerging temperament-based approach, proving the biological foundation to augment existing treatments, and it includes support persons. And it's for persons of all ages. So you, as a clinician, may have been trained once a person is 18, then they move into individual treatment, that it's about autonomy, individuation. But the fact is, beyond individuation is interdependence. And what we know is the more we look at the biology of anorexia nervosa and other illnesses that are as complex as eating disorders, the more we need support people throughout our life. A clinician is a support person, but you cannot be with the client 24/7. So we need support persons to be as engaged and on the same page of treatment as the clients themselves. So, and we've begun our research with anorexia nervosa. My slide has stuck. Okay, I don't know why, but I'm going to. I'm going to just come back in and from current slide. So who are the support people? That includes spouses, parents, friends, colleagues, pastors, children. I've seen many children of the clients be primary support people, relatives. Anyone who is a support person is someone, could be a co-mate, partner, anyone who is there and wants to learn some to all that they can to be learn tools together with the client to manage the illness. So this new temperament-based therapy with support has 5 core principles: that eating disorders are biologically based, that we are treating to the traits, the biological traits of this illness, that support people are fundamental to the treatment, that we address food as medicine throughout, whether it's adolescents or adults, and that movement and action is fundamental, and that the brain, as we follow the brain, the more we realize how important movement is, and that movement should be a part of therapy, even when the person is ill, unless they are so ill that they are bound to their bed. Training is being piloted in Australia and how clinicians are experiencing and applying TBTS in Australia in different treatment settings is how we are addressing this tonight. And we're going to be turning to the colleagues that live among you and work amongst you. And these colleagues are going to share how they have begun to utilize or try on aspects of TBTS. Because while TBTS can, I've given you a background formulation and show that it's a foundation to augment treatment. It's offered in modules, and modules being portions. So if you want to think of it as a puzzle, the puzzle becomes, the frame of the puzzle becomes the behavioral agreement that is so critical for both the clients and the supports that the clients facilitate them to work through. And then all the tools that can be used to complement other treatments can be modules that clinicians can take and utilize in various levels of care, or as you see necessary to, based on your client's individual temperament profile. So to try this on and to see what modules or what methods different clinicians are using, we're going to start with Carmel Fleming at and TBTS being applied at QEDS in Brisbane. Hello, Carmel.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Shall we unshare that picture of me?
Oh, thank you.
And use my real face. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Lovely to be here and happy to talk about how the Queensland Eating Disorder Service has been trying on QEDS. And I think that's an excellent way to think about it, because we have yet to fully implement it as something like an intensive 5-day program for carers and that kind of thing. Although it is, since we have started the, we did the training in 2019 when you visited, Laura, it has been implemented and bubbling amongst all the clinicians here. And I'm just going to talk about how we're doing that at the Queensland Eating Disorder Service. Just to give you a background though, we offer two treatment levels here. So one is an intensive individual outpatient program where we offer mostly cognitive behaviour therapy and specialist supportive clinical management. And that is with adult clients, well, 16 plus actually. And we have an intensive day hospitalisation program. So that runs 4 days a week. And but in both those programs, we have been on the road of family inclusive practice for quite a while now. And when TBTS was emerging and came to us in 2019, it really fitted with our own philosophy, which we were trying to do more of here at QEDS, which is practice that what we were preaching, which was how to involve the loved ones and supports of adult clients. And it sounds so simple to say that, but it is really quite a paradigm shift in the world of individual treatment for adults with eating disorders. So it took a few tools, and we're using other things, but TBTS certainly is one of the tools. And it was that philosophical approach, I think, that was very supportive, first of all, of our continuing endeavours to involve families and supports whoever they are at any point with our clients. So it was a philosophical support, which was great. And I think that is actually a part of a wider shift in our field, and certainly one I'm hoping to encourage through this, that we can, whatever treatment we're offering, we're coming at it through a support inclusive lens, because I personally in my career haven't met anyone who's recovered from an eating disorder yet who has done it by themselves. So it is, and we can only go so far, and we need that natural support system. So that fitted with our QEDS philosophy that's been emerging, and we've been trying to practice within our existing treatment. So within our current day program, which uses a range of evidence-based approach and supported meal therapy, and within our individual treatments, mostly cognitive behaviour therapy and SCM. So in that way, TBTS also provided a set of tools, so a set of practice tools. So we had a philosophical joining of the minds, but it also came with a set of practice tools. And I noticed, because I supervise a fair few of our outpatient therapists here, and I noticed it coming up in different ways with different clinicians. So often there will now be much more focused discussion in the psychoeducation part of either CBT or SSM from clinicians, or perhaps sometimes I suggest they do this, about that the biological basis to eating disorders, and working out ways that it's going to be effective, and how to explain that to your client using an analogy or a story, whatever it is for that client. And clinicians have taken that up. So the best thing about those tools, even just as psychoeducation for clients and their supports, is that it helps form a better engagement, I think, with the client, and helps the clinician, I've seen in supervision, helps the clinician align with the client, because the client's sitting there going, yep, yes, that's me. And immediately they're better seen by the clinician. So that even just at that level, that newly emerging genetic and neurobiological information, I think, has been very helpful. And the third, but there's other tools we use too, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the third part of what I think TBTS has been able to offer us at Queds is that it is actually it's a philosophy, it's a set of practice tools, but it's also a process. And it's a process, it really is looking at the process base of our work. So we're not so focused on not only focused on the end product, like we often are in CBT or other treatments, but we're also attending to the process with the client. And that is so important for so many levels, really. And it is particularly important for that engagement and keeping someone in our evidence-based treatments, because we can get them in the door, but they don't always stay. So we know that that is related to outcomes, and I think that helps. The process approach, the appreciation of how you do things is also very important in terms of what it offers in terms of collaboration with supports. It's active in that way. Something like CBT, which I do and supervise in, have done for many years, is that it is reactive. So yes, you can come into a CBT session, support person, or we can even see you separately, but it will be in reaction to something within the CBT session or the structure, whatever it is, the client's progress. TBTS philosophically is proactive in that regard, and that certainly fits with what we were trying to do here at Queds, identify support people from the very beginning of our treatment contact with anyone, and looking at ways to include them whichever way that fits for that person's supports and that adult, because of course they have to be empowered to include those supports. So the inclusion of carers within our clinical team here at Queds has really benefited from that boost that TBTS takes, and that proactive support. And and then in terms of the actual practice tools I've seen used, I think it really has firmed up that idea that behavioural contracts are necessary, because which we use and we know in things like CBT, and SSM, looking at clinical management of clinical symptoms. But it's saying, actually, we do need a new set of behaviours for this person. It's not going to come naturally. And I think over time, many of us, me included, have tried to talk people out of these traits that they have. We've tried to insight them out of it. We've tried to motivate them out of it to change. None of those things have worked very well. So it's very supportive of the idea that possibly these are endophenotypes, maybe, and that they're observable behavioural things that are related but are not part of the disease. And if so, we need new new approaches, new behaviours and learned behaviours for the person. So the behavioural contract will help provide that. And in that way, it's kind of confirms something we've all known, but helps to explain it to the client, and then supports why we would be insisting on that, whether that be through SSM or CBT or whatever. So that certainly has been useful. And then certainly using it as an approach to provide education for supports and to coach them in ways, just a simple example like using limited options when providing a decision point for your loved one. That is so helpful to support people. And it's such an easy tweak that they can do that it feels quite empowering. They go, oh, I just changed that. Yep, that's good, you know. And you get into this quickly, I found, because I do all the family work here at Queds, so a lot of individual family sessions and care consultations with whatever supports the person has. And you notice they're able to, with those kind of tweaks, you're able to get a sense of mastery quite quickly for supports, and then their confidence lifts because they've been trying these things that don't work. And that's where I appreciate it in my work. Certainly, and even that idea of movement, you know, your idea of stop, reboot, reroute, get up, walk and talk. And I noticed in a session with a mum the other day, she came up with that idea. Well, maybe we shouldn't just sit there because that doesn't seem to be working. What if we went for a walk around the block with the dog and did the talking then? And I said, well, that sounds great, you know, and I was able to explain why that could actually be helpful. So that it's the why, as you said, Laura, but also the how that I'm finding particularly helpful with my work with supports. And yeah, just the very strong focus on planning and structure and practice, which we do in treatments like CBT, but this gives more rationale for why you would be pursuing that, and without any expense to the therapeutic process or alliance, I found. So that's been useful. And we're not doing that formally with a group of carers in a 5-day intensive. We're just able to integrate that into our approaches here because we're running a family inclusive treatment approach alongside our evidence-based individual treatments. And it has really been able to support that. So I'll probably end there, I think. Am I at time? Yep, great.
You are.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carmel. And that's a wonderful example of kind of bringing some things together as you're sharing how TBTS is becoming applied throughout your team. So at this point, I'd like us to, Jasmin Watson is going to step forward and share how she has begun to apply TBTS.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. So I'm an occupational therapist down at the Geelong Clinic, which is a private inpatient program for people aged 16 and above with an eating disorder. And my role in coordinating our day program was to set up a new day program. So at the start of this year, I looked at kind of our region and what was missing, and TBTS struck a chord with me in terms of how it can be added into treatment that's already experienced by people with eating disorders, but also offer a new lens on perhaps people's recovery. I noticed that there'd been a lot of people in and out of our inpatient program for years and not making progress. So it was a great opportunity to try a new treatment in our region. And so we've structured TBTS in our day program alongside an embodiment approach, which is one of my areas of interest. And I'll talk to that a little bit later about how nicely they work together. So TBTS is offered as part of an 8-week day program. Once a week for the full day, people come into our program. TBTS is run in the morning sessions, and then we do our embodiment practices in the afternoon. What I've found really great about TBTS is that we, as an OT, I'm very much about doing doing therapy, doing recovery. And TBTS uses activities to explain, you know, the information about the brain and traits. So people are up out of their seat, they're moving around, they're learning about stuff while they are doing something. So it really resonated with my background as well. And I found the activities in TBTS have really taken down any walls or barriers around people maybe feeling a little bit shy or unsure of how to kind of take on such heavy information about the brain. It's been a really accessible way to share information that is essential to understanding your disorder or your loved one's disorder. The supports that come into our program, the support people come in 3 of the 8 weeks, and whilst they're there, we only do TBTS with everyone together. I thought I'd talk a little bit about including supports in our area of eating disorder treatment where it hasn't been done typically after 18. And it's been quite a challenge of our program in that there's been lots of things people bring into this idea of including a support person after years of not having a support person involved. And even for some people that have had supports in the past, it's been rather traumatic in terms of their relationship and the impact on the relationship with the parent post them being involved in their treatment. So people come into the program it's a non-negotiable we have. You have to have a support to do our day program. And it's a really difficult step we've found for the majority of our people. And so it takes a lot more time as the clinician to go through that with the support person and the person impacted by the eating disorders. So that's been one of the areas that we've learned along this year in how to be able to process that with families and with supports and with the person with the eating disorder. I think the other difficulty with supports is that post completing our day program, I've very much tried to set up how to continue supports being involved. So the people come into the day program, but then they go back to their treatment in the community with their private psychologist or private clinician. And so we're talking to the teams non-stop throughout the program to try to make sure that the supports actually carry on post the day program. It's been absolutely incredible actually to see some of our clients come to the end of the program and comment on things like, I never knew how okay it would be to have my mum involved, or I can't believe I felt so worried about this all the time. The TBTS information we share with the supports is often received as in like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this is what's happening to my person's brain, or this explains so much to me. So supports are leaving feeling a lot more probably empathetic to their person in being able to understand why it is so hard. And the response for clients is, yeah, that's exactly what happens to me. It's very validating for the person with the eating disorder, not necessarily news to them because they live it day in, day out, but it gives them a language to explain it to people around them that's been missing in the past. So that has been a really lovely part of TBTS, is seeing how the information can actually make change within the relationships between support person with the eating disorder. There's a few key parts of TBTS, Carmel was touching on it before, around really practical stuff supports could do. And the fact that it can come from the person with the eating disorder is just absolutely powerful. It's not being taken out of their hands. There's so much lack of control when you're trying to recover from an eating disorder. And if you can give someone some bit of control on their recovery, then it actually can make a significant difference. The other interesting part of TBTS is the relationship to movement. So I'm a yoga teacher as well. And the reason why we incorporated the embodiment approach to TBTS is because it really connects into thinking about recovery and thinking about your mental health from a bottom-up approach, learning how to recognize what's going on in your body, what your body's trying to tell you about your emotional state, and then using that to actually do things a bit differently. I found introducing movement an interesting process, given that it's often feels like it contradicts a lot of other treatments where people come into the day program saying, no, I'm not allowed to do any movement. No, I've been told nothing. And for people, I guess, a disclaimer, there's certain people that is true. But for a large proportion of the people we see in our program, there's no medical reason why they can't take a 10-minute walk or they can't do some gentle yoga under a really trained and experienced facilitator. After our lunches in our group, we all go for a walk around the block. And the people in the program have said, like, this is significant. I didn't know that I could just walk around the block and maybe I wouldn't be so caught up in my head. And it really provides an additional aspect of recovery. It opens the door for people to not be afraid of their bodies and not be at war with their body, but use their body to help them get better. So it's a really interesting way to get people to think more about how can their body help them in recovery, as opposed to how much they struggle with accepting their body. So I think in terms of our experience, so we've run the program a couple of times now, about to do our third cohort. Some of the challenges along the way have been about feeling confident as a clinician to share the information about the neurobiology. I've noticed that as I go along, I seem to be feeling more confident in explaining it. I think one of the beautiful things about TBTS is it takes away this expert role. I very much am alongside the people in the program, sharing my own learning process, sharing my experience. Traits are something we can all relate to. So I tend to use that a lot in our program around identifying my traits and noticing when they come up in the sessions, to model what it's like when your traits get in the way of being able to be your best version of yourself. So I think the other thing that I've really enjoyed about TBTS is it's just allowed a new wave of excitement of treatment for an eating disorder. As someone that has recovered from an eating disorder myself, it felt like treatment wasn't working for so many years. So to give people an opportunity to have something else to add in their tool bag is really powerful and exciting time, I think, to be a clinician in the eating disorder field at the moment. So I think that's my time up, Laura. Hope that's useful, and obviously open to questions at the end if anyone has any.
Thank you, Jasmin. And so incredibly helpful and important, the various aspects of how, as you took it on the first time in your program, I have to say the bravery of, it's not just changing and working alongside the client and the support people, the support persons, but alongside dietitians, seeing how it's approached differently, and even the hospital system, because systems aren't used to including supports. And I appreciated that. So now we're going to move forward to a person who is just beginning to try it on, because it's a new language, it's a new expression. And Tamara Worotniuk is moving forward in trying on, just like you try on new clothes and a new wardrobe, she's trying to determine modules and explore modules of TBTS to try on in the wardrobe of her treatment. So Tamara?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you for trying my surname as well. It's been tripping people up since I was born, I think. So Tamara Worotniuk is my name. I'm one of the clinical psychologists here at Epworth Allied Health. So we're perhaps a little bit different to Jasmin and Carmel. We're a general psychiatric service, so we're not eating disorder specific. We run some outpatient programs and some inpatient programs. And my background is not in working with patients with eating disorders specifically. My background is working with patients with personality disorders and particularly BPD. So of course there's lots of kind of coexisting eating disorders there. And this is an area that I'm particularly interested in. And the kind of reason that I've come to this work was thinking about a bit of a research project and a bit of a project that I can be doing where there's some gaps in eating disorder treatments, probably in the whole of Australia. And what we have come up with is thinking about how we support patients who are admitted to our general psychiatric facility, but who have an eating disorder. Because certainly we know what we're doing from a kind of medical perspective, dietetic perspective, but I think the psychological work for that short time admission is perhaps a little more hazy. So that's kind of where I've come into looking at TBT S. So perhaps a bit differently from Jasmin and Carmel, I'm sort of looking at some discrete pieces of work that we can be doing with patients while they're on our general psychiatric ward. And so I've had some consultation with Michelle at Seed, and one of the areas that she directed me to was TBT S. And so I've had the privilege in working with Laura over the last couple of months and thinking about how we can apply that here on the ward. So in terms of what we're doing, so the work that I'd be doing on the ward with these patients is seeing them for sort of one-on-one support, and obviously then involving their supports in that. So it's not group work that I'm doing with their patients at the moment, although hopefully in the future we can think about some group work as well. But just for context, probably seeing patients over, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 sessions, usually not much more than that, and trying to involve their supports in that as well. So that's kind of the framework for the work that I'm doing. And in terms of what I've done from kind of TBTS perspective, a couple of key things. So a little bit of the psychoed around what's happening from a biological and neurological perspective, but obviously scaling that down, but a little bit like what Jasmin and Carmel were saying, just immediately, even when I start to explain some of that to consumers as well as their supports, I get this kind of nod of, oh my gosh, this is exactly what is happening for me. And just seems like much more of a buy-in for treatment, like perhaps we actually understand what is going on here. So I think that's been really, my sense is that that's been really validating for patients. So a little bit of psychoed around what's happening neurologically and biologically. Done a little bit of work around the temperament, so looking at a tool called the temperament checklist. So getting patients to have a look at what kind of temperaments they may hold, some of the temperament that's working for them, some of the temperament that's not working so well for them at the moment. Not trying to get rid of that, but trying to twist it into being a bit more helpful. And I've found a little bit like Carmel and Jasmin were saying that has been a really validating process. Patients have really been on board with that. And I wonder if maybe perhaps Jazz, you were alluding to it a little bit, that sometimes the treatment can feel a little bit like we're doing to, or a little bit kind of controlling or a bit adversive, but actually talking about patients' traits, you know, there's been a real buy-in, and I think it's been really validating for them. And talking about that actually these are traits that are aligned with success for people. These are not traits that we want to get rid of. These are just traits that we want to spin a little bit so they're working for you. And how can we do that? So looking at traits has been really helpful. A bit of education around neurobiology, and then introducing the TBTS toolbox. So some of those really kind of practical skills that Jasmin and Carmel were talking about. And I've been introducing that with patients as well as supports, or doing that together. So just offering some really discrete tools that patients can be using pre-meal, during meal, post-meal, and some of that work that supports can do with those patients as well. And again, I think, you know, that's been quite kind of clear direction about what we can be using. So it's kind of broken down, it's simple, it's written down. We talk about how patients might use it, and we try it on in the session. So it's not this abstract kind of sense of a skill that we can use. We try it on in the session. We really break it down to when might we be using this skill, what might it look like, and let's play this out in the room. I know it feels contrived, but let's do it here and now. And I guess that's come from you, Laura, in terms of that, you know, like neurons that fire together, wire together. Let's actually do this. Let's get those kind of new pathways working for you. And then the other bit of work that we've been doing is looking at some kind of variations around the behavioural contract. So there's some documents that are set out within TBT S that look at things like, what are my warning signs that things might be getting worse for me? When might I need to seek a kind of high level of care? What can my supports be doing to be working with me? What are the skills that I have? How can my traits help me? What can I be doing pre-meal, post-meal? So the work is really kind of detailed, and I think that's really intentional in terms of talking about perhaps that kind of tray of low central cohesion, that patients are really struggling to see the big picture. Much more helpful to have things really in detail. So that's probably the couple of pieces of work that I've been doing with patients on our ward. I think the work has gone down really well. Patients have really engaged well with me and actually been able to shift their eating disorder behaviours while they're on the ward with us, which has just been, yeah, a pleasure to see. I've actually had the opposite to Jasmin, that patients have wanted their supports involved, which I've been, I was sort of ready for the needing to convince patients around it, but they've just said from the get-go, yeah, that's fine, let's do it, that'd be really helpful. So that's been kind of interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, I think kind of echoing Carmel and Jasmin's points, so the power of the psychoeducation for what's happening from a biological perspective, I think has been really huge, which Carmel was talking to. The idea of working with traits rather than trying to get rid of traits. And actually this is something that, you know, this is such a great basis for us to work from. We've kind of got some stuff there already. That's been really helpful. The planning and the structure has been really helpful as well. I think for patients, but I think similarly for clinicians. And I'm kind of interested in this parallel of, you know, when we're asking patients to eat, that how much kind of noise is going on for them, how overwhelming that is, what a kind of open direction that is, and that we know that patients, particularly with these restrictive eating disorders, don't do well with those kind of big open directions. They need much more kind of detail and things broken down. So I'm interested in this parallel between patients' experience and new clinicians' experience in working with patients with eating disorders, when we just say, all right, just go in there and do some work, but we don't have structure, we don't have detail. And once I've been able to kind of have that structure and detail and the worksheets and the kind of knowledge of where we're going, it makes things much less overwhelming. And then just kind of picking up on Jasmin's point as well around the doing. So I think that's probably one of the things that I've kind of been struck by as well. I think when I was new to TBT S, although still quite new, but when I was brand new, it was sort of quite overwhelming. It was quite academic. I was thinking, oh, this is a lot to get my head around. And then we actually take that information and we apply it in a very practical way, and we actually do something with it. We get patients to do the skills. We get them to, you know, we get them to play things out, even though it might feel a bit anxiety provoking. So yeah, this is a process of kind of doing is something that I've been struck by as well. And that, while it may sound very kind of academic when you look at all the kind of literature behind it, that actually it's a very kind of practical therapy as well. They're probably my main sort of observations and experiences with it. So far, it's been really fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I think that's the other thing, actually. Maybe you were talking about that, Jasmin, that it's quite kind of fun as a clinician to be applying some of these things.
And taking that idea of fun, in many of the tools, I know Jasmin has tried them on the group setting tools like the landmine game or the brainwave or the various group tools. They were set up almost like children's games to be so that they could be playful, but very specifically providing the structure through the game to try on what the client is how they're going to use their traits to solve the problems. So it becomes an exciting method And I appreciate Tamara and Jasmin and Carmel just really, you know, as they took the ideas and dared to try them on with clients, and then the clients began to affirm. And then the moment they affirm, it becomes an interdependent response, just like it is with the supports. And you're moving back and forth, constantly working together, and that the client literally becomes the expert, and that my job is to get out of the way. We'd like to.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to reiterate that point as well, which kind of Jasmin mentioned, you're saying there, like this lovely ability to step out of being the expert and to kind of say, look, here's what the research is showing us, but I want you to kind of help me think about how this applies for you and which skills do you think you could use. So I think, yeah, there's a really lovely sense that you don't have to be the expert in this, and that actually want the clients working with us rather than kind of doing too. That's been a lovely start as a new therapist to just kind of settle things a little bit.
That's very helpful to hear, Tamara. And now, in bringing things up more together, we're going to ask Michelle Roberton to, from SEED, to be able to take us to the next step of where you are with TBTS.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to everyone who's here today. If you just bear with me, I'll have a go at sharing my screen and make you look at a few slides. Or before I do that, I'll just say my role today is to really give a bit of a service-wide context to the wonderful work that Jasmin and Tamara are starting to do, and be looking at what's emergent and what are opportunities to bring this work to a state system that's in transition and renewing at the moment. So bear with me while I share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that, and I'll just convert it to the screen. I've always got to remember to press twice. Okay, everyone can see that? Beautiful. Okay, so just a little bit about the Centre of Excellence in Eating Disorders. We're a statewide system in Victoria that does a lot of service system support work, and the modes we do that in is case consultation, training and education, developing resources that are going to support clinicians and people experiencing eating disorders and their families and supports, and a lot of service development support. So we don't have a direct clinical role, so I can't talk about all the exciting things that we're actually implementing at the moment, but I can talk about the fact that we've been a long-term collaborator with EDFA in exploring and understanding TBT S, and it's certainly exciting to hear how that's rolling forward. Just to give you a little bit of a context for the system in Victoria, this is kind of like a mind map of how the service system is at the moment and where SEED actually sits. We're a statewide service that has overarching but limited mandate for what we do. And so we have to always work in a relational way to see who's ready for change and what capacity they have for change. And of course, in any mental health system in the world, resource capacity is always a big tension in the system, having enough to meet the needs of community. I left that slide in just to let you know that service development is probably our primary lens that we look through. And finally, just a little bit of a vision of how we work. We tend to work in a grassroots way, that we privilege early access to eating disorders, and we're really on about how do we mainstream ideas about how to support people who experience eating disorders to the broader mental health system so that everybody gets what they need. We've had quite a lot of opportunity to collaborate extensively with our child and youth sector, and hence our probably core principle is working from a family-centred way, which is how you would talk about it in child and adolescent, but really buying into the idea that we need to privileged supports being there from early in treatment. And I think it was 2018 when EDFA brought Laura out for training. So we were involved with that and really excited about the idea that we might be able to replicate that kind of approach that we've been using in child and adolescent by rolling out that everybody can get access to individual family-based treatment and augmenting that with a multi-family therapy approach. We thought, wow, this is going to be a great opportunity to do that. Of course, Victoria hit a very challenging time that's giving us real opportunities. First of all, many of you may be aware that there's been a really extensive Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system, and now we've finally moved to the transforming the system implementation phase, which is rolling out kind of slowly, etc. And behind the report there, you'll see there's a new idea for a whole new system that is actually going to be focused on the needs of community and families and people who are experiencing distress in eating disorders. And you'll see there's going to be 6 levels of the system there, quite a complicated system. And one of the new opportunities that I'd like to highlight here, that each state has been given quite an amount of money to establish a residential service for eating disorders that will be a statewide service. Next week is the first workshop to look at models of care and what needs to be incorporated in the service delivery here. So I'm be going to that. And I think I will be talking with Jasmin and Tamara this week to get a lot more information, because both SEED and Eating Disorders Victoria, which is our kind of consumer carer partner that we work with extensively, will be very much wanting to kind of create the idea of the opportunity that TBT S might be to bring in both a kind of supports and consumer-centred care, and the innovation of really understand how do we help people, how do we understand what people who have eating disorders are experiencing better, and how do we support them to have a flourishing life. So I'm going to stop now, but I'm just sort of hoping that we can see that there's emergence and opportunities about to come on us here in Victoria. So let me stop my share and hopefully it will go away. Thank you.
Oh, beautifully. And how wonderful to see where Australia is developing in its mental health services and the opportunity that SEED it has to be able to help provide opportunities for development and outreach, and to raise the bar of treatment in eating disorders. That's exciting, Michelle. So I'm going to pick up where we were, let's see, and go, okay. Didn't mean to do that. I'm going to try that on again. And let's go, okay, concurrent slide. So as we have discussed, TBT S offers the therapeutic foundation for other treatments and modules that you may draw upon certain traits. TBT S, the book that we have that is coming out called Temperament-Based Therapy with Supports for Anorexia Nervosa, a Novel Treatment, has a trait-based checklist. And we've taken all the personality models through the last 30 years and pulled out core traits, as well as the last 20 years of personality trait research neurobiologically from eating disorders. And so the trait checklist would be something that would be valid for any illness. And then we've made sure that it has the core traits that are common to eating disorders, so that clients can look at their traits, any of their traits, and see how their own traits formulate what they're doing right now, and how that trait could be expressed positively or destructively, productively or destructively. And so this treatment, we're saying, is not to be one or the other. It's to be complementing and integrating and mixed into. My colleague and co-developer, Stephanie Nats-Peck and Christina Waringa, and the visionary behind this, Walter Kay. All our colleagues from UC San Diego have looked at this as the completion or an additional major factor in the treatment. It focuses on long-term change, not just short-term, because we're looking at our traits and how those traits can continue to evolve to identify and use their productive side. And that in clients realizing that maybe their own, let's say, optimistic trait, or their own curiosity trait, or their own sense of impulsivity could be used productively to actually try to manage their symptoms. We often think of the impulse as only destructive because it impulsively triggers the binge or the purge. But that impulsive trait can be used very productively as well, and working that through with clients and realizing how that just magnifies who they are, their own sense of self, empowers the client to be more truly themselves, and and serving themselves to be part of their own solutions. So we treat to the traits to manage the symptoms with supports. That's kind of the theme of TBTS. And we are this fall unrolling a TBTS Training Institute that we hope to start in January, which will be when the new book will be released, Temperament-Based Therapy with Support by Cambridge Press. And the Training Institute will have 3 levels of training. The first, having clinicians learn the neurobiological and biological and temperament foundation to eating disorders virtually. And learning to incorporate meals and supports into the temperament treatment. That will be both virtual and face-to-face trainings. And then integrating TBTS into with the other treatment formats, as well as levels of care. Some may say, I just want to season my treatment with TBTS. Others may say, I want to do like Jasmin, 1 day of treatment, day treatment once a week. And what we've been studying in open trials has been looking at TBTS as a 5-day startup, that then they move to other levels of care as with the foundation very intensely established, and then they move into taking those tools into their ongoing care. So these are some of the research and our new treatment book, our new book that's coming out, of where we've been studying TBTS to point. And I can't believe I didn't include the slide of my colleagues, but clearly Stephanie Nats-Peck at UC San Diego, Dr. Christina Waringa, neuropsychologist at UC San Diego, and Dr. Walter Kay, the director of the Eating Disorder Program and psychiatrist and neuropsychiatrist at UC San Diego. They are, the 4 of us have been on the train to developing this. And then the key experts and a voice in every part of the development of TBTS have been the clients. When we were developing the training tools, every tool, every word in those tools have been proofed and given, and feedback have been given to us by the clients. If you change this sentence, it reflects me. If you change this approach or you add this to this game, you really have You've made it work for me, Laura. And that's how we developed every tool, by the clients and the supports constantly informing us till we rolled it around. And then the research team saying, yes, that tool reflects the current research, it reflects the client's input, and it reflects the support's input. And that's how we have evolved each and every tool and each and every aspect and module of the treatment. So with that, we are ready to start seeking what your questions are, what your comments are, what your thoughts are as you are listening in on this. And I'm going to start by just bringing out what something that Jasmin was saying as she was saying the importance of not being at war with your body. And I think it's been an issue in treatment from the 40 years I've been in treatment, how often working with eating disorders, unlike anxiety or depression or adjustment disorders or many other illnesses, the motivation to get better is often the motivation just to get out of the pain of the illness. But we've all known with eating disorders, the motivation factor is to cling to those symptoms. We now know that's because those traits, you cannot give up your traits. So the issue is we're asking clients to not be at war with their traits, but begin to identify what their trait profiles are looking like and begin to realize how they can make peace and productivity and work with those traits to become the person that they are potentially capable of being or want to be more of. So it is a treatment approach that I have found to be one of the most motivating for the clients, because I'm working with each client profile, not against them. So I'll say that in summary. And what are some of your, if you want to unmute and ask directly, or
Laura.
go through, if you want to go through the chat, that's fine.
Laura,
Yes.
just a quick one. I'll just ask Gordon to give a brief wrap up on his, as a support person, on the conversations that have been during this plenary.
Thanks, Don. Look, I guess to everyone, we'd love to hear your comments through the chat function. And if you have questions, can you please type them in the chat function in a to everyone format. Look, there hasn't been a great deal of commentary going on through the panel, through the chat. I imagine everyone has been listening intently, which is fantastic. But I would like to take the opportunity to give you the comment from someone in the support role. First of all, can I thank each of you and your respective organisations for taking the step and being prepared to give it a go. Always difficult to be the lead and the first ones out there. So I admire your courage and I thank you very deeply for it. As an individual support person, it's just so refreshing to hear the support role being acknowledged. I mean, we are out there and involved in our loved one's journey, whether we do it well or not. So having a methodology that actually brings us into the method and coaches us to do it in an optimal way is so refreshing. And maybe you can imagine, but to be kept out of the process, which many of us have experienced, is just the most frustrating and angering of experiences to have. So thank you so much for that. Working with traits and how supports we can do this is, again, a great bit of information. And so I don't know, again, to explain the emotional importance of this, but your help in bringing down the barriers between the clients and us as supports is such a liberating and releasing and freeing up. And believe it or not, I am welling up in tears when I hear that. Because I have experienced that barrier, and it's such a personal and deeply hurtful thing to go through. But because we love our loved ones so much, we push through. But it is great to have a methodology that's going to help do that in a far more constructive way. So can I again urge people to put questions up there? While we're waiting for one, can I start off with one?
Yes,
I think
but
perhaps
Gordon,
Laura to lead this off.
Before you start with one, Gordon, you may fire me after this, but I'm going to break protocol. And it's not that it looks like with the number of people that are in that they could everybody show your screen so we can see you, so that we can be our own group tonight. And there's enough there are few enough of us that maybe you could just add your comments or your questions just directly, because it's not like we have hundreds or thousands listening. We have, it's like it's a nice sized group. So let us see who you are. And unless you're in your jammies, even if you're still in your jammies, just as long as you're presentable, let yourself be seen. And it's wonderful to get to see you, so that I'm not just seeing your name. And to then also add, if you want to unmute yourself to add a comment or to share or offer a question, that would be lovely, because then we can be talking directly to each other, which really is what this treatment is about, doing it much more directly.
Thanks, Laura. Fumi has actually put a question to there, but Fumi, it actually goes to the question, similar to the question I was going to lead off with. So could you put your question to Laura and Jasmin, please, that you had about movement?
Thank you, all the presenters. It's been a really good morning listening to all of this. And I think this question goes to Laura and possibly you, Jasmin. I'm a dietitian. Most of my clients are dancers. So movement has always been an integral part to them. And I'm just interested to know a bit more about that involvement of movement in their treatment to really facilitate it, rather than the traditional you have to stop everything until you get better. Because I was literally having a conversation with my client yesterday about this, and I ended up telling her, look, let's go for a walk, 10-minute around the block with your father, because that's who she feels safer with. But I did notice myself, I was thinking, am I providing like the right advice here? So yeah, I would be grateful if I can hear a bit more from you two.
Well, I'll start with the neurobiology, and Jasmin can take it on into her expertise of what she's experiencing and where she's been integrating it. But the more we've been studying the brain, and I've been so grateful since the genome was sequenced and by 2000, and then the technology allowed us to start looking inside the brain. The more we're looking inside the brain, the more we realize how the brain organizes itself through movement, and that movement is the organizing fundamental factor. From the brain works from the bottom up, just as Jasmin was talking about. But the brain starts, the infant starts with movement before it can even talk. Cognitive behavioral therapy works from the top down. It wants us to be reasonable, thinking, put plans into place. But when fear occurs, thoughts shut down and movement is necessary. Movement can get thoughts started again. Movement can bring fear to a more moderate level. Movement doesn't have to be an hour of active exercise. It can be 10 minutes of walking tall, so that you're breathing deeply while you're walking. And nothing may be said because intensity is there, or as one father said, as they started walking after dinner every night, He said at first she was irritated because she'd eaten all that was before her, and she knew she needed to eat all that to make the energy necessary so she could be stronger. But she was irritated about it, and so she and I would walk. But if she was mad, it kind of went out front, and she wasn't facing me, so she verbally vomited into the front, not onto me, and then she could just keep walking. And he said always within 10 minutes we were talking and moving on to other topics, and the relationship continued to build. So as the client said, I can't imagine not eating and having dinner on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with my dad or my husband. We've now set up an opportunity, or my partner. So movement becomes so critical that once I realized the brain organizes through movement, that's why the TBT S games became critical. The client is playing a game that's a very simple children's game like telephone, while they're learning about the brain and understanding what's happening with restrictive tendencies or binge purge tendencies. And the game becomes the physical activity played out to understand and then realize. Clients said, once I began to see what was happening, I could then even picture and try on and practice actively what to do differently. And so the more we're doing in the clinical session, such as walk and talk, I walked frequently and often with my clients, whether it was inside when it was raining or outside. And the point being that when you're moving and starting the tools during therapy, they're going to be able to move with them outside of therapy. If you talk about it, they're not going to do it because they haven't tried it on. So Jasmin, you want to add to that?
I think there are those guidelines, the exercise guidelines. The name of that document is lost to me in this moment, but they would be something you can consult in terms of if you're wanting more structure of what's allowed. Yeah. But I think I used to be a dancer before I studied OT, so I feel like I could talk for hours about this issue. But coming back to how TBTS sees movement, perhaps it is about working with the person on the why they're wanting to dance. Most dancers, before you get caught up in a disorder, movement is joy. Your body is this amazing vessel. Along the way of an eating disorder, it turns and it becomes this horrid at war thing. So I think it is about teasing that out with the person around, well, if you're wanting to connect and find joy in movement, how can we do that in a safe way? So it may be not in the studio taking a ballet class for an hour. It may be at home doing some contemporary movement in some baggy clothes and finding their body again when they've lost that connection. So I guess I don't see movement as good or bad. It's interesting because I think as clinicians, I definitely am afraid of talking about movement at times. But I also notice in clients when they're really wanting to recover, they too are afraid of movement. And we need to be able to talk about it so that none of us are afraid of movement. It's not the enemy. It's actually so much. Yes, there's so much value in that.
Laura, Ben Huntington has posted, I'm currently working with an adult client who do not wish to involve family. Are there TBTS specific ways of discussing, exploring with clients the benefits of involving support people?
Glad you asked, Ben, and please feel free to unmute and let yourself engage with me as I talk about this, but also as the other clinicians, I'd like the other panel members to join in on this, because what I found is initially, the first time you start to try to help a client, and the adult clients are often the most resistant to include a support. And so over and over, the adult clients will say, I want to be able to do this myself. And my response will typically go to anything else that's biological to give them an understanding. And one because I see you wearing glasses, I may say, well, you may want to see without your glasses, and you wish maybe by the time you're 18, you'll be able to not wear glasses anymore. And you may go, that's ridiculous. My eyes are at a place, I just have to wear glasses all the time. Well, your glasses are your support, and they compensate for the optic nerves that are not aligned or are responding in a way that you can see clearly without them. Well, this illness requires that we have support that are just like glasses, only they're people. And so if you don't want to include your family, my response immediately is, okay, then there are other people. Do you have a friend you would like to include? Do you have a roommate you want to include? Do you have, well, I wouldn't want to bother her. Well, maybe it's not a bother. Maybe she would like to know what it's like to. So if you would be willing to see if they would, we could just do a quick Zoom. Would she be able to do a half hour with us during our session next week to see if she would be willing to be included? So, or many clients will say, well, I'd like my pastor included. But would he have to do everything? I'll go, no, your pastor may be the glasses and you have another support that does your hair, or, different people have different roles. So we typically, and when we were studying it, would say every client could have up to 4 supports at a time. And I was getting insane beyond that, but 4 supports were ones. And so I was amazed how clients would say, I want my roommate, my best friend, my girlfriend's in Georgia, another state, but she can now Zoom in. My dad is going to be at the factory, but he said he can take lunch off every day. So let's do our sessions when he's free so he could Zoom in with me. And the number of times the husbands or the partners were right there. It was amazing to me. And what I found is the easier it got for me to just assume that at least one support will be a part of this, it became easier for the clients to accept it. If I was tenuous or nervous about it, it was easy to reject it. And I think Carmel was speaking to that. The more she, that transition of learning how to include them, and now you can't imagine treatment without it. You want to add to that, Carmel?
Yes, please. I agree. I don't know where you work, Ben, but certainly you have to start as you intend to proceed. So it involves a shift for everyone who works where you work, including yourself. So I think family inclusion and family in my world is family of origin or family of choice, because that's very important for adults. You go with whoever you've got, as Laura said, because people will have different roles. It's whoever is in a supportive role, whoever you can find. And we know our clients are very isolated sometimes, but it will be from the admin person all the way through intake, through assessment, through allocation to the treatment of choice, and then through engaging the person in the treatment and delivering it with them, that you're assuming that you have someone in your natural support system who's going to be part of the team. And until you opt out, so that's kind of how we've developed it more at Queds, until you opt out of that, and sometimes people have a very good reason, but that means if it's not family of origin, we have to find someone else. That's just more grist for the mill. That then that is going to happen. And that's from a risk perspective as well. In terms of, we see people for an hour a week or a few days a week here, and then they go home. So that's very helpful for clinicians. Clinicians often worry, this is going to increase my workload or open Pandora's box or whatever. In my experience, it's a false economy not to do it. But as Laura said, it takes 3, 4, 5 asks before you will get the person to come around to that idea, because of learned behaviour, experiences, emotional avoidance, whatever is going on for them. So fear, So. And then actually that self-reliance too, Laura, I think that is quite a strong thing I see in our clients with eating disorders, the prioritising of self-reliance. And we're trying to take that relational view that actually recovery happens through relationships.
Thanks, Carmel. We're approaching the end of our session. And thank you all so very much for attending. And I'd like to pay a particular compliment to Jasmin and Tamara, who are clinicians who have examined what's been available, attended our sessions and things, and been prepared to give this a go because they can see the potential for it to have benefits for their clients. Thank you so much. To Michelle at Seed, thank you for supporting it. And thank you so much for your work in it. To Carmel, thank you for your work that you do and your belief in taking this on. And to Laura, thank you again, my friend, colleague and mentor. And thank you for allowing me to call you that. A wonderful exercise. And to your contributors back at UCSD and including Yvonne Eisler, who was consulting at times. So I'm so pleased that we have this opportunity to bring a new way of doing things and a new set of principles and stuff to how we engage with clinicians, researchers, clients, and support people. Thank you so very much for your attendance at this session. And I hope that it's given you opportunities to explore implementing this in some part in your practice, into your general practice, and hopefully we will see before too much longer opportunities for people to attend a full 5-day treatment program with the ongoing support from clinicians that are in a step down, step up process for TBT S. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Presenters and Gordon, if you can hang back, please.
Thanks, everybody. And hello, Laura.
Christine.
So good to see you.
Bye-bye. Goodbye,
Bye.
Anthea. Bye, Tracy.
Bye. Thank you.